Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello,
Hello.
hello.
Oh, we have people
Hello.
on the other end of cameras as well. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Always good to see everyone, especially with a small group.
exactly. So I'm just going to very quickly introduce Gary Lintern, who is presenting today on NLP without limits. Discover what's possible beyond certification. And just to mention to everybody, this is being recorded and it will be going up on the ANLP website for those of you who want to watch it later. Over to you, Gary.
Thank you. Good to see a nice group in today. Can I just get a quick indication in terms of experience levels? We'll start at the bottom with people like me. Any master trainers in the group? Just stick your hand up. Any trainers? Hey, we've got a few. Master practitioners? Practitioners? Anything else? But I don't see anybody on my screen at the moment. Okay. So everyone has some level of experience with NLP. And I would say, yeah, the content we're going to have today is probably most use to people with a bit more experience, but by that I mean practitioner or above. So let's kick things off. So I'm Gary, as you can see. I was just working out this morning. I've been in the NLP field for 36 years, I think. So I know you're all thinking now we must have started really young. I started when I was 3. So maybe when I was a student, something like that. But probably like a lot of you, once I got to know what NLP was and got my teeth into it, I couldn't let go. And have been part of it ever since. I've been around John Grinder and Carmen Bosick St. Clair for about 17, 18 years now, which have honestly been my favorite 17 or 18 years in NLP because what I've learned from John and Carmen is just incredible. I've also studied a bit with Steve Gilligan, and the reason I'm mentioning Steve is Steve talks about when he first met Milton Erickson, he just knew he was somebody he was meant to learn from. And Steve, if you don't know, was somebody who John and Richard thought was a hopeless case and was a prime candidate to send to, they used a more flowery term, but let's say a hopeless case, and send him off to the desert to meet Milton. And he became one of Milton's long-standing students who spent a lot of time with him. But Steve says that when he first met Milton, first of all, it was like meeting a kind of hypnosis Yoda, but also that what came to mind for him was the scene in Close Encounters where they communicate with Mothership and it communicates back, you know, the da, 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 and that back and forth. And I feel a bit like that when I first met John and Carmen. It was just right. And I'd been exposed to their work for years. And as you're probably aware, John had been out of NLP for a while. But I soon realized how faithful Tony Robbins was to John because he learned a lot from John. So all the stuff around physiology and movement is all John's stuff. But we'll maybe talk about that in a moment. What do I use NLP for? You might have seen from the description of this quite a few things. Um, I have built several businesses from it, and all of those businesses I built started as modeling projects. So some years ago now, maybe 15 plus years ago, I modeled photography and modeled landscape astrophotography specifically, and then built a workshop business around it. And when COVID hit, I took it online because I realized all the camera clubs had closed and did quite well with that and built a business so big and so quickly that I had to have admin workers and also multiple trainers because all of the big names in photography were sitting at home doing nothing. So it was really easy to get expertise and then learn from those as well. And kind of segueing from there, I also started a stargazing tour business because I realized that, yes, there were a lot of people who wanted to learn landscape astrophotography, but there were even more people who just wanted to go out under the night sky and learn about it. And I did that in the way I usually do things by acting as if, getting competent and credible enough, and getting people to open doors for me. And that's a really great way to start, to congruently act as if and get people to open doors. And then very, very quickly start to learn the ropes and surround yourself with good people. And that's certainly part of my process. So I became, about 2 or 3 months after I decided to do that, a volunteer director of a stargazing festival. And then I became the director of a new community observatory and learned on the job. And actually climbed a fence into what is the biggest waterfall, arguably by volume in England, High Force Waterfall in Teesdale, County Durham, near me, photographed it with the Milky Way over it, sent it to the hotel in the country estate that owns it, Raby Estates, and said, I think this would be a really great venue for stargazing events. How about it? And then, long story short, before we knew where we were with that one, especially when lockdown ended, it was a six-figure business in terms of turnover pretty quickly, which was also interesting. And I had to then train and recruit team members. But all of I've put that behind me now because I tend to learn stuff, do stuff, and then sell it, pass it on, and then move on. But that is still very much a going concern. And last time I checked was the main source of revenue for that hotel. Grouse shooting used to be the main one. And as a vegetarian, I'm quite pleased for the grouse that stargazing overtook it, as far as I know. And the last year and a half, I've been applying a lot of this to myself in terms of health and fitness. 2 and a bit years ago, I really started working on lifelong severe asthma and got all kinds of new treatments, tried things and did some stuff myself, and it worked. And the upshot of that was I've lost about 10 stone in weight over the last 2.5, 3 years as a result of that, and being able to move better. And in January this year, started to learn springboard diving at the local diving pool and became part of an adult squad there, and have managed, using modeling and just acting as if and being willing to hurt myself, to get to the point of backwards dives and somersaults in about 4 months. Somersaults usually end up with me flat on my back, but something I modeled or was told by a squad member was to get a diving shirt, get it like a swimming shirt. It really doesn't hurt as much then. But I always call that feedback. The first time I dived off a 3-meter board and slapped my legs on the water and they went all kinds of colors. I've never seen my legs go before for a week. That's feedback. You don't do that anymore. And diving is really good at instant feedback. And then more recently, in just under 4 weeks, having never run before, apart from trying to run for a bus twice and failed miserably, I completed Couch to 5K. So I completed that on Tuesday night this week. So yeah, really working on that one. And just enjoying being fit, enjoying being active. Set myself the goal a year ago that I was going to learn to love movement and exercise, whatever it took, and I did it. My body craves exercise and activity now. And if anyone's never found that, go and look for it. It's not hard to find. It just gets a bit uncomfortable at first for a while, and then it starts paying off quite quickly. Anyway, let's get on with the business. Thank you, Karen. I have made an obligatory slide deck because everybody likes a slide deck, don't they? I do. But just a few, because I want to go through a few basics with you. NLP without limits, there we go. And why does the zoom window always go right over the bit you want? There we go, got it. Can everyone see that okay? Just give me a thumbs up. NLP without limits, here we go. So right there's an important term. NLP was always intended to be a meta-discipline, not a discipline. And that was John in the early days, and I guess Frank and Richard to an extent, but this was always John's thing, that it would be a meta-discipline. He wanted an alternative to psychology. And okay, people debate this one, but John's view on psychology, and I'm a psychologist, so I think he's right, focuses on the mythical average. In other words, you get a population of people, you study them, you quantify it somehow, like people can be quantified, and then you look for the mean in the middle. And very often that mean doesn't even correspond to an actual person. So John was always more interested in outliers, people who do things exceptionally well, and also people who do things exceptionally poorly. My work project for the last 2.5 years has been coaching. So I have a hard finish today because I have a coaching client at 2. I've just slotted this in between things. I set myself the goal of completing 3,000 coaching hours in 2 years, which I've done. I've done 3,200. And all with high-functioning neurodivergent professionals, mostly ADHD and autism, and refused at the outset to know anything, as much as I could avoid it, about both conditions. I said, of course, I did know about them. And of course I did, because I can calibrate and I can pattern. But I wanted to model those conditions because I didn't want to be blinkered by what the diagnostic manuals said. Because I always had a feeling that both ADHD and autism was something quite different to what the professionals said they were, and I now know that that's the case. I also now suspect that the diagnostic categories are so out of whack that they should probably revise them, that pretty much every person with an ADHD diagnosis I've worked with has autism traits as well. And it wasn't that long ago where it was completely impossible to have ADHD and autism at the same time. I don't know if you were supposed to have one day and one the other, but that was what the professionals said. It was impossible to have ADHD and be diagnosed as an adult not that long ago, and yet here we are. But I think we're going to get to the point where the label neurodivergent drops away and we realize, Calciprese, we're all different. And just like diversity in terms of gender, sexuality, ethnicity, we have diversity of cognitive style. Who'd have thought it, eh? But it's been an interesting journey. And I've learned a lot about supporting those people. But also I've taken the emphasis that I was going to use coaching integrated with technology. Anything where somebody with ADHD, for example, can outsource the stuff they don't do very well to an app or a piece of software is a win. And I use a lot of AI in my coaching too, which has been really exciting. As a child of the 1980s who spent at least 4 evenings a week typing games in out of computer magazines on a VIC-20 or a Commodore 64 or a BBC Model B, and then finding they didn't work and having to debug them, then changing them. I was passionate about computers and I lost that, but AI's got that back for me. So NLP is a meta-discipline, a discipline that sits above all of other disciplines. And that's the important bit. That means it can be applied to anything. And that's where we start. So some of this may be controversial, although I think deep down inside you'll recognize it. The traditional view of NLP and NLP training is that it's remedial. It's around fixing problems. We look at things like content. Now, I don't have time to go well into the distinction between content and process in terms of the Grinder world of NLP. But a lot of this, this presentation is influenced by John's way of working, and Carmen's too, of course. But a lot of NLP patterning focuses on content rather than process. And ideally, NLP should be able to be done content-free. And you've probably all had experiences of that where a client doesn't even have to tell you what they're working on. They can just give you a code word for it, or they don't even have to say anything. And it's great because it means they can work on anything, especially if they don't want to share it. You don't get bogged down in their content. And even with the best will in the world, assume they're like the last person you saw who said they were depressed. Don't you find that weird? That we still assume, well, a lot of people professionally, that because we use the same words, we mean the same thing. And I've been thinking a lot about hypnosis recently. I did a recording of Milton Erickson and presented it at John's certification last year at John's request. And hypnosis, you know, we assume it's the same thing. How could it possibly be? How could we all possibly speak these magic words like this incantation and have people enter the exact same state and all call it the same thing? I don't think so. Yeah, so historical views. There are still a lot of NLP techniques that dig around in the past. And that's all well and good, as long as we remember that the past doesn't even exist. It's just fantasy. We know what we know about memory. Now I try to keep abreast of neuroscience, and I use AI to teach me a lot of neuroscience underpinning everything I do. Memory, every time we remember something, it's a reconstructive process. We are actually remembering it and creating a new memory every single time. And it's always different. It all depends on where we are, who we're with, how we're feeling. And the output of NLP has always been practitioner, master practitioner, trainer, master trainer. There's not many people really sat down and thought, okay, why do people have to then train in order to become a trainer and then continue the process? Why can't there be other things? Well, I think they can. I'm planning to put some programs together. I think I would really like to do an online modeling certification using John's approach to modeling, and maybe something for NLP developers as well, but that's another story for another time. So how should it be in terms of a meta discipline? Well, the application should be generative rather than remedial. creating things that haven't existed so far, modeling patterning that we had no conscious knowledge of or no unconscious competence in. And it should be on process and structure rather than content, because that's where the gold is in terms of patterning. And should be on the emphasis on people who are creating something new, something brand new. Because years ago, I have a couple of attempted PhDs under my belt, by the way, where I got so far in. One of them was psychology and thought, no, not for me. Because of this mythical average thing, but also psychology likes to think you can break something beautiful down into really small pieces, study those pieces in a lab, and put them back together, and it'll work again. I know from a whole childhood of tinkering with things and getting multiple electric shocks, it doesn't work that way. I was always pretty good at taking stuff apart, but putting it back together was another matter altogether. And I think it's the same with psychology. So we need to create new things, but I remember when I first applied for a PhD, seeing it must be something new. You must contribute something to the field you work in. I thought, wow, how could I ever do that when I was about like 19 or 20? Well, we can all do that. And I would encourage you to all do that. You're probably all doing that already, but make it formal. Just realize that NLP can be anything you want it to be, and give yourself permission to do that. So similar kind of things on this slide. I just wanted to show it a bit differently. But we need to break away from passive consumption, from emphasis on content, and also looking at these techniques which have been handed out since the 1970s in most cases. And remembering that they're really just like training wheels on a bike, like a stabilizer, that when you learn it, you tear them up and you never do them again. Until, of course, you do trainer's training, in which case they make you remember them all again, and you have to be able to teach them from the handout. And then you can rip them up and forget about them once more. But I want to make people lean more towards things like a discovery mindset, a growth mindset, and being very rigorous about what you do. Because as I'm going to say in a moment, the way you start learning will govern the outcome you get. If you don't take care to clean things up before you start a modeling or even a study project using printed material, you'll always get what you always got, because you'll perceive it through your own filters. More about that in a moment. So if we study surface behaviors, and that's all we ever do, we get into analytical modeling. So I'm not going to sit on the fence here. I'm going to say any approach to modeling that requires you consciously asking questions and making notes is not NLP modeling. Okay, it's creating a model of sorts, but I would question how useful that model would be. When I first heard of John's approach to modeling, which I learned through Judy Deloja about 30 years ago, something like that, on a Master Practitioner in Santa Cruz, where you expose yourself to something and you pick it up unconsciously, and only when you've learned to do it, do you actually start thinking about it and put it into words. I thought it was crazy. How could we possibly do that? And then I remembered, not personally, but I knew I must have done it. I did this when I was 1 year old, 2 year old, 3 year old, and all the way through my life. We learn to walk by watching people around us. We have the potential to walk, but we need to watch people. We learn to speak. We learn our native language by listening to people around us and just absorbing it unconsciously. So yeah, of course we learn like that. And it takes a bit of adjustment, but for me, that is the only way to learn them. So you pay attention to physiology, or the things you already know, what somebody's muscles are doing, their breathing, macro movements, micro movements, the tonality, and what's become more important in my work recently, attentional patterns. I've done a lot of stuff on attention. The recording I did of Erickson was all about attention. And I believe you can explain pretty much everything that works in NLP and hypnosis with attentional moves. But I think that's another workshop for another day. And it all happens unconsciously. So you're modeling unconscious states. And if you can do that, you can learn behaviors quite rapidly. So years ago, when I read some of Wyatt Woodsmall's stuff and attended an online course with him, Wyatt talks about a few interesting things in terms of modeling, including Project Jedi, the pistol shooting training that a lot of them did in the 1970s, which, as I understand, a big part of that was Richard doing it and then not doing it anymore, and then John doing it. And then John brought Tony Robbins into that one. And I think that was the first project after his practitioner is firewalking. So that was an interesting project. But Wyatt talks about the Chinese diving team. which has always been of interest to me anyway, and might have been what guided me towards diving. The Chinese, a bit like the Jamaican bobsled team, if you've seen Cool Runnings, came from nowhere to sweep the board at the Olympics in diving. And having no infrastructure, people wondered how they did it. And what they discovered was that they'd been training by jumping from bridges into rivers, things like that. And they'd had to dig rivers out to make them safe, but they also had other techniques. Things like, these were just rumored at this point because there was nothing written in the English language apart from the occasional magazine article about it. Things like they would hold a firecracker in each hand, or they would give the diver a firecracker, light them, cut the fuse so it went off in 1.4 seconds, which is how long it takes someone to dive off 10 meters, come out of a tuck and land in the water safely. And it was to encourage them to come out of the tuck on time, otherwise firecrackers would go off in their face. Don't try this at home, but it's an interesting technique. But the Chinese were obsessed with Greg Louganis, the leading diver in the world at the time, who was American, and did a lot of modeling of Louganis and breaking him down, in breaking all his movements down. And they made an important point. So by the way, I went off and found a Chinese book. It was written solely in Chinese. I found it online using a Chinese website and Chinese AI, and then translated it and made videos from it with AI. So I got to know how they did it. And they make an important point. In the 1950s, they learned a lot of technical approaches to diving from a Russian coach. And they realized the Russians at the time were way bigger and way more muscular than the Chinese kids they were training. And the stuff to do with movement didn't apply to the Chinese as well. So what they had to do was absorb them and then translate them into a smaller body size. And that's key. You can't do that without doing it experientially. All of the Russian stuff you could explain on a blackboard with mathematics and physics. But some things you just have to do it and then translate it. So for me as a coach, my way of learning is the way I do coaching. If I suggest a client do something, I'd better have done it myself or be prepared to do it. So I am constantly testing things on myself and using my coaching as a sandbox for my life. My life is a sandbox for the coach, and it's all because of this. By the way, I will pause for questions in a moment when I've got through these few slides. So make a note, make a mental note. So in terms of perception, this is the Grinder model. We start with raw sensory data, and then we process it unconsciously. But what we then do, and this is a key part of NLP and the early stuff around the meta model and the universal modeling process, deletion, distortion, generalization, we map it into language, which we have to do, we're compelled to do it. We seem to have a compulsion as a species to categorize the world and label it, which we have to do. The latest opinion on perception from neuroscience is it is at best controlled hallucination. There's a lot of stuff being proven now in neuroscience that we've known in NLP for decades, but neuroscience says that most of what we quote unquote see and hear in the world around us and feel up to a point is imagined. It's based on what happened the last few hundred times in that situation. And we only update it when something out of the ordinary happens that we pay attention to. This is why those of you who drive will have driving routes you take that you're familiar with, where you go on autopilot and you have no conscious recollection of it. This is why a lot of car accidents happen on familiar roads and within a mile or two of people's workplaces and homes, because people let the guard down and they go into autopilot and their brain thinks it's just the same as it was last time. But sometimes we don't update quick enough. But we have to do that because we don't have the energy or the bandwidth to treat everything as new. If you've ever done a hypnosis exercise or just a general workshop exercise where you walk around and attempt to see and feel and hear things as though you've never seen, felt, or heard them before, you'll know what I mean. You find there's a lot of data out there that you weren't paying attention to, because that's the way we are. But in a similar note, we have to label the world. I'm looking at a room here that has 4 chairs in it. One of them looks different to the other 3, but the other 3, I bet if I looked at the wood grain on them, they'd be different. But they're still chairs. We can agree on that because we drive ourselves crazy if we have to give everything individual names. If that was Susie, Alan, Steve, and John over there, and not chairs, that would be useless. So we have to generalize, we have to categorize things, and language is the way we tend to do that. We can do it as well in terms of part-whole relationships and how things look, but language is a huge part of it. So the dilemma with modeling and research and development in NLP is that if you attempt to model excellence while you are actively analyzing it, you'll only capture what your existing biases want you to see. So you'll see it through your filters. Any kind of conscious interpretation before something's a complete model or a complete piece of learning will distort it and will just confirm what you already know, which is probably not accurate anyway, because there is no real objective reality like that where everything is correct. And this is how it goes. We take the sensory data in, we filter it consciously, and it becomes distorted. The more recent approach to this in the precision model and the verbal package in new code NLP is everything's deletion, but it's all academic anyway. I've also heard John say that the whole idea of deletion, distortion, generalization was just a teaching tool. Like so many things in NLP, it doesn't exist in reality. But if you apply it to something, you can learn interesting things by doing it and make distinctions from it. And that's what we're all about, isn't it? And especially those of you who are trainers and coaches, you are training and coaching people to have different experiences. So how do you get around that? You get into a know-nothing state. You do everything you can to suspend your interpretation, which will usually involve silence in your internal dialogue, and there are techniques for that. You switch on your unconscious uptake. You just absorb things as best you can without judging them, without evaluating them, without even labeling or describing them. And then you demonstrate you can do it. And once you've done it, you can then move on and teach it and write about it. This is John's exact words on what the know-nothing state is. To model pure excellence, the practitioner must intentionally suspend all conscious interpretation, analysis, and categorization. By entering a disciplined know-nothing state, you allow your neurology to unconsciously absorb the expert's patterns exactly as they are, untainted by your own preconceptions. So if you ever found yourself learning something new, and I know I have, I try not to these days, of course, and you think, okay, this is just like that. The moment you think, oh, I get what this is, it's just like that, you've lost the ability to notice new things because you've just mapped it onto something you already know. And you're going to, from that point on, view it through those filters unless you do something about it. I am of the opinion at the moment that non-fiction books have a limited shelf life. I learn mostly through AI systems, and I can just learn so much more and so much more quickly and get right to the stuff I want to know rather than the fluff. I did a survey with an AI agent called Manus, and Manus did some research for me to find out what amount of the content, what percentage of the content in non-fiction books was original, unique material. And it analyzed a series of non-fiction popular business books. And it came to the conclusion that less than 1% of the average non-fiction book is original, unique, usable content. Meaning the rest is repetition, case studies, examples, and fluff, just pure filler. And most people who start to write a non-fiction book, you could explain it on the back of a beer mat. But of course, you can't sell backs of beer mats, you sell books. And yes, of course, you get some of their knowledge in that. But essentially, you can boil most non-fiction books down to a few ideas. So I have an AI pull those ideas out for me. And I trust it like I would a research assistant. Of course, it'll occasionally miss stuff, but so what? If I'm in the middle of reading a non-fiction book, there might be umpteen ideas I come across that by the time I get to the end of the book, I've forgotten them. Because when we're in the book, when we're reading a book, we're in the moment. It's a serial experience. So my learning has accelerated tremendously in the last couple of years with AI. And I just don't know how much longer books have got. Fiction and poetry is different because it's to be consumed in real time and enjoyed and appreciated. Non-fiction, there are possibly better ways to do it. But books, it led me to the question of what value are non-fiction books really? What value is other people's information? And I came to two conclusions. One is you can knowingly start studying something, knowing you're going to filter it through your own personal history. And if you're a communicator, a coach, a trainer, a product developer, you're going to use it to provoke yourself to alter your map and alter the descriptions in your map of what you already know, or join what you already know together in different combinations. The other way, and to do this, you need a book written by the person whose skill it is, like not somebody writing about other people. And they need to write in the first person. And you need to, as much as possible, suspend your ability, your tendency to try and make sense of things and just try and have a bodily experience of what they're talking about. And in that sense, reading a book, when it's a well-written book by the person who has the skill, can be akin to modeling. But modeling, being right in front of an expert, being able to absorb what they do, is the gold standard. So I'm just going to whiz through these ones because I want time for questions in a moment. So what do? First of all, you work out what it is you're fascinated with, what's your obsession. And it better be something that you enjoy, something you are obsessed about, because it's going to carry you. You need passion, you need enthusiasm for it. Then you model someone, you model one person, you model multiple people. You might get bits from several people and do a bit of design work and put them together. You experiment. So you try stuff as soon as possible. And the other important bit is you iterate. You see what results you're getting, you calibrate, and you change things and you calibrate again. And you see, has it got closer to what I want or further away? Or has something new happened I hadn't even considered that I quite like? And then you head in that direction, maybe. And you manage your state. And you manage the state of the people around you. You manage teams you're working with. And you manage yourself in terms of learning and what you do with it. And also, as I have been practicing recently, you take care of yourself. There are only so many years you can get away with thinking you're a brain in a meat suit. The latest thinking on cognition is most cognition is embodied. You need to have a body to experience things, to think, to perceive. And I have thought for some time, when a friend a few years ago had bariatric surgery, we know that the stomach, the gut, is the second biggest area of innervation nerve cells in the body outside the brain and the brainstem, the spinal cord. So when you have most of your stomach removed or cut off, what does that do? I don't think anybody's really talking about that one, but just a little side quest for me there. By the way, I vowed to never have anything like that. And if you're wondering, I found a unique way, a revolutionary way to lose weight. I decided I was going to eat less and move more. How about that? It works. And then you anchor your learning, you utilize your learning, you translate what you have into something you can offer to the general public and ask for money for. Because that's business, right? That's life. You know, we need money to get by. And anybody who produces anything unique and revolutionary and it brings value to the world, especially if it brings commercial value to the world, deserves to be commercially rewarded. So let's summarize this. Step one, identify your niche. And this is true of any business. If you have ever fallen into the business trap of thinking, oh, I really like this. This is a really good idea. People would love this. I'm just going to put a lot of time into it and develop a business. Usually it flops because you haven't matched it with the market. You don't know what it is that people want. So you pinpoint it and you perform tests. And the tests will not go into detail. I've spent a lot of time. I did a mastermind with a guy called Jeff Walker, who's one of the leading online marketers in the world, but he's in the USA. And Jeff, if you've ever seen anybody who does a free course in 3 parts, where in the 4th part, they're asking you to sign up for something. And Tony Robbins does this all the time with Dean Graziosi, because Tony learned from Jeff. But that's Jeff. That's Jeff's thing. He calls it Product Launch Formula, PLF. A 3-part course, and then some kind of action point, and then an enrollment. Because as far as Jeff is concerned, it's the easiest way and the most trusted way to get people to know who you are, to like you, to trust you, and to buy from you. But you test things. You match your niche with the market, or ideally you talk to the people you want to serve and say, what do you need? And you'd better get clear on that, otherwise you're probably wasting your time. Although there is a place for just developing something because you think it's a great idea and hoping for the best. Of course, a lot of artists do this and they just see how it lands. But mostly, if you want a business to be successful and you want to put food on the table, you'd better find a niche that fits with a need out there in the marketplace. You take a deep dive, whether it's modeling or whether you're reading, whether you're doing research, and you suspend your analytical mind, your tendency to label, categorize, and you assimilate the patterns. And if you need to establish credibility or if you need to learn, you act as if. It's very possible when you act as if to learn from yourself. So in the early days of NLP, they did a lot of experimentation around deep trance identification, which came from Russia, from the USSR, from Vladimir Rykov. And Rykov proposed, the paper was 1975, that you could put someone in hypnosis and have them develop skills they didn't previously have. He was right. It's called modeling, but it's also called acting as if. So let's explain that. It might be a story some of you have heard, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's one of my favorite stories from NLP. John and Richard, when they were living at 10,000 Albert, which was the community most of them were in, where Gregory Bateson lived. It was owned by Robert Spitzer of Science and Behavior Books. Robert was the one who eventually brought Richard Bandler in to write up Fritz Perls's work and eventually write one of Fritz Perls's books for him when he died, finished the book off for him. And Bandler modeled Perls through videos that way. But they all lived in this community. Carmen calls it a commune, a hippie commune, maybe it was. But there were some interesting people in it. And one of them was a jazz pianist called Paul Nagel. I think Paul's still alive. I think he's in Florida. So I guess he would be in his late 80s too, maybe his early 90s like John. But Paul idolized McCoy Tyner, who died a few years ago. I've seen him on Jules Holland. He's pretty popular as a jazz pianist, a really tall African-American guy. So Paul came round one night. John and Richard were in one of their living rooms, and he invited them to his birthday party. And somehow, because the two of them, John and Richard, said they could communicate non-verbally very effectively in the early days, they made a kind of agreement they were going to do something. So they brought him a glass of water, started to do a double induction on him, and had him do a deep trance identification with McCoy Tyner, his idol. And then they had him perform Paul perform one of Paul's own songs at the piano, one of his tunes, in the style of McCoy Tyner, and they recorded it, I think, on reel-to-reel tape. I guess it would be in 1975. And then they give him amnesia for it, for the experience, and bid him good night. And at Paul's birthday party, they give him a present and invited him to play it. And Paul instantly recognized McCoy Tyner's style and was amazed and full of gratitude. How could they get McCoy to agree to do this? And eventually they told him it was you. So what went on there? Did hypnotizing Paul suddenly make him a competent jazz pianist? No, he already was. Did it suddenly connect him in the living realm with the spirit of McCoy Tyner and somehow transmit his patterns? No. Paul had spent a long time watching and listening to McCoy Tyner. All it did was give Paul permission to become more McCoy Tyner and less Paul for a little while. So act as if. It's really powerful. Some people say act as if it's the same as fake it till you make it. It really isn't. They're two very, very different things. Act as if is one of the most powerful principles in NLP. Then you experiment, you iterate. And this is John's phrase in here: you provoke the world into instructing you on what works. Like diving from a 3-meter board. I'm quite thinking I might do a dive from the 5-meter platform on Saturday for the first time. I've been thinking about that one. It's a long way up, a long way down as well. If it doesn't work, I will get feedback. Hopefully not a dislocated shoulder. I've taken steps to prevent that. But I was more blasé about this a few months ago until somebody said, oh, so-and-so dislocated the shoulder doing that, but mostly it's okay. I noticed also that the diving squad, the first time I met them, most of them had some kind of brace or bandage or some kind of elastic device holding part of their joints together. So I'm going to be careful about that one, but I think I'll do it. But if it doesn't quite work, I'll get a bit of feedback on that one. But I'm going to provoke the world into instructing me on what works and what doesn't. I think I know what works. I'm going to prove it. And then you develop it and you test an MVP. This comes from a concept called lean startup. And when I learned about lean startup, it comes from agile. It revolutionized my approach to business. I'd spent years trying to write business plans to hand over to the bank and the enterprise agency, and then find it didn't work and I lost enthusiasm. And I got bored writing the 30-odd page plan. With lean startup, what you do is think, okay, what is the easiest and the most rapid to develop prototype I can develop that I can take out there and test? In other words, what can I make that I can try to sell someone and see if they go for it? And if they go for it, I am first of all very grateful, but I also talk to them, what worked about it for you? What would be better? What else could I do? And you learn from your first customers in the same kind of way you do with everything else. You test, you calibrate, you iterate. And that is where I'm coming from in terms of my approach. You become an architect of excellence and you share excellence. And I also looked at using AI to do the opposite of crunching the book down into key principles, taking key principles, modeling my writing style and writing books, until I thought, I don't know how long books have got, but I might still do it. And somebody said, well, isn't that cheating? Well, I'm old enough to remember when people said that about using calculators in maths at school and in maths exams. And I think before too long, we're all going to have to embrace AI. And the education world, the universities are already moving. I have a few clients who are senior academics. They're already embracing AI. They're having people just do it like an honesty declaration. But they're also having to move away from essays, thank God. I mean, and exams, my God. When I did my first master's degree, I hadn't realized it was going to be assessed by exam as well as a few essays. And I just hate exams. They never worked for me. I just usually run out of time. But they're doing away with exams and they're doing away with essays. What they're mostly doing now is the equivalent of a research degree viva, where a lot of the projects are things like create a podcast, create a piece of media, do a presentation. And then we'll ask you questions, as it should be. So I decided it wasn't cheating at all. What it was like was the way an architect works. An architect designs a building and they have a construction company build it. Whose building is it in terms of IP? It's not the construction companies, it's the architects. The architect designed it. Okay, they put the bricks and mortar together. But in a lot of architect companies, it's usually a senior architect who does that, who delegates to a team of architects to the construction company. So I started thinking of myself as an architect of knowledge, an architect of excellence, that in that case, anything goes. And in terms of writing, there are loads of fiction writers doing this now with ghostwriters and doing them by name as well. James Patterson, for example, is a really good example of it. James Patterson gives a style sheet to authors whose work he likes. He's seen samples from them and tells them what to write, and then he edits it. So anything goes. The world is changing. In fact, the world is changing so rapidly that the rate of change it's changing at is accelerating. So all bets are off as to what the future holds, but certainly pattern, excellence, product development, all of these kind of things, knowledge management, are all going to be skills of the future. And I really hope you embrace them. Now, before I take questions, that's my email address. I was going to wait until I saw how many people were in the room, and it's a decent amount, so I'm pleased. If there's only one or two, it couldn't work. I am willing, probably on a Tuesday night, maybe sometime in July, because that's the only free time I can reliably have, to hold a Zoom where we can just sit and talk about what your projects are, what you want to work on. No charge, happy to do that because I enjoy it. And because you're part of the process, you're helping me develop something. So I'm going to pause for a few minutes. If you would like to be part of that, or you simply want to communicate with me, and I will reply to emails, drop me an email now, if you're somewhere where you can. And I'll just talk about anything and nothing for a few minutes while you do that. office@garylintern.com. And you're not obliged to be part of something, but I would certainly love it if you did, because you're going to learn a lot from it, and I'm going to learn a lot from it. So that's the plan. I don't know when I'm going to do it yet, but I think Tuesday night, possibly late July, maybe August. But also, if you're going to be away, if you've got a holiday planned, let me know, and I'll do my best to avoid it. My plan in the near future is to continue doing what I'm doing because I love it. To It's just occurred to me that it's always occurred to me actually that couch to 5K is too much of a jump for a non-runner, and no pun at all intended. Couch to 5K is too much. When I did the first week of Couch to 5K, which was 4 weeks ago last night, I don't mind telling you, I went there with my 12-year-old son because he wanted to do it. I probably wouldn't have continued if he wasn't with me. He goes diving with me as well. And I learn as much by coaching him and watching him. But I also got onto ChatGPT and told it the feelings I had in my chest and my fingers. And should I do something about it? And ChatGPT said, yes, don't do any more running. Stay where you are. Call 999. Seek emergency medical advice. I decided I didn't want that, so I went to Google Gemini instead, and Gemini said, you're probably okay. Just make sure you do proper nutrition and hydration next time. So I went with Gemini. Gemini, fortunately, was right, but it made me realize actually that week one of Couch to 5K, which is 7 60-second runs with 90-second walks in between them, was too much for me initially. I did it. Everything after that was a breeze. Well, not exactly, but it was okay. It didn't take me long to build that up, but that was the hardest week. So I don't know, I might do bed to 4K, bed to 5K, floor to 5K, who knows? But that might be one of my next projects. We'll see. But there you go. Thank you. Those of you, I can see a few things popped on my phone. A few people have sent emails. Thank you. If you're not somewhere where you can email right now, just jot it down, take a screenshot. I don't mind you getting your phone out and photographing it. And that is that bit of the workshop. Let's do hands up for questions, please. Thanks, Lynn. So you can use your actual hand, but virtual hands are easier because it cues you. Come on, I want to speak to some of you. I'm just going to have some of my adaptogen and mushroom-infused coffee for mental clarity. It does work. But as I always say, if you get a placebo effect, it only costs 50 pence a cup, so what? It's a bargain, isn't it? Okay,
Abu, you're up.
Great, thank you very much. Gary, really interesting chat and presentation. Thank you very much for that. I was very interested, Gary, to understand when you said in your presentation that the as if frame and fake it till you make it are different.
Right.
What's different about them?
Fake it till you make it. By the way, one of my favorite TV shows of all time was Faking It on Channel 4, which was around the 2000 mark, late 90s, early 2000s. You can still get them, by the way. You can still watch them online. Faking it, there's a degree, for me, like you're not taking it 100% seriously, but faking it, the language of it is you are pretending. And that's really quite different. So one of the discussions I found in a forum that John participated in had AI extract some discussions for me so I could read them from a long deleted forum. He talks about the as if frame as being the alternative to constructing beliefs for yourself. And fake it till you make it's more about, okay, if I believe this for long enough, then it will probably be true. Acting as if is saying, okay, I can do this and I'm going to do this now. I am going to throw myself head first off a 3-meter springboard. There's nothing can prepare me for that apart from getting the right positions and the right attitude. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to act as though I've done it 100 times before. And you never know. Sometimes it just works because you do, similar to the case study of McCoy Tyner and Paul Nagel, you've been modeling and watching people all your life. So when you get to a certain point of experience and also maturity, there are all kinds of models in there you can tap into unconsciously. So it's a really different thing. And John says that, beliefs, when you work on limiting beliefs and set empowering beliefs, you're in the realm of language, linguistic categorization and labeling, and it's not experience. Whereas acting as if is pure experience. Does that explain it?
Yes, it does very well. Thank you. Just a quick one regarding your couch to 5K. I've actually entered a half marathon.
Hey, well done.
I last did my half marathon in 1987.
Right.
And then I had a series of back injuries, operations, and whatever. And I've always since then kind of believed that I can't exercise. But just recently, I've caught the bug again. And I've actually got a similar program that I'm hoping. So please, Wish me well.
I do. So there are people who will say that your cardiovascular system will adapt first, and it will. Actually, what adapts first is your brain and your nervous system. With any kind of exercise, your brain marshals neurons and starts making the areas you've exercised more innervated and more responsive. Then your heart and your lungs adapt, and then your body adapts. That's the last one to adapt. So the caveat is people say if you rush couch to 5K, you run the risk of shin splints, maybe even stress fractures, tendonitis, things like that. But I have learned mostly from John and Carmen as well to check in with my body unconsciously and just get an unconscious signal as to whether I'm okay. And I realized as I was stepping things up quite quickly, I was absolutely fine and I was recovering really quickly. I wasn't out of breath or anything like that, not in a major way. So I decided it was okay. But I also told myself that as I've been doing springboard diving for months, that has done something in terms of making my legs resistant to impact. It must have done.
Mm.
So therefore, on those two bases, I was going to be okay. So just be careful about rushing it in terms of physiology and take appropriate advice on that. But I found it was way easier than I thought it was going to be. And that unattainable goal of 5K, just breezed through it.
Yeah.
Because what I started doing was staying a week or two ahead.
Yeah.
But we use so if you look at, I think it's called Running Together, the website.
Right.
There are Couch to 5K in-person programs all over the country, thousands of them for free. So I went on one of those in a nice historic house and chapel. It's a lovely place with a garden full of rhododendron bushes. It's just a lovely place to run around. Still on it, actually. Well, I've got 6 weeks to go. Bonus time. But I decided after that first week, I was going to rerun the first week a couple of times, literally, and then try the second week before we had the second week, and I was okay. I did the third and fourth before the next week, and I just thought, let's do the 20-minute run, which is the really daunting one in week 5. Fine with that. 2K, because I was doing 6 kilometers an hour, which is fairly slow, but it's enough. That's the other thing, you've got to adjust your pace. What I was doing the first week was trying to run too fast, so I slowed it right down. It was still a run, and then I can speed it up in the future. I don't care. I've hit the goal. Or you can just act as if.
Yeah, absolutely. And
with the guidance of your unconscious in your body.
Exactly. That was my real reason for asking that question with that in mind. My only nervousness is the fact that I've actually entered to run the half marathon in Malaysia, where it's going to be quite hot.
Yeah, you don't do
But
things
thank you
like
again,
that,
Gary.
do you? But I like that.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate
Take
it.
appropriate precautions and realize the climate will change things, but engage with AI, do some reading around that.
Yeah.
Ask some people.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I don't see any other hands. Come on, who's next? I need more questions. I need more comments. Or just tell me. If you disagree with what I said, tell me. Okay, Lynn.
Hi, thank you, Gary. Very, really, really thoughtful. Give me lots of brain stuff going on at the moment. I guess just picking up on what Obu said about the as if principle. I guess for me, one of the things that comes across from that is also other people's response to you when you are in that as if, because then people have a different response to you that reinforces the different position. And I think because often when we work with people in families or in workplaces or different environments, they often take messages from other people, from their interactions. So that as if actually also changes people's response to you. And I think that's really powerful.
I realized when I started coaching people with ADHD that the way that I learn, the way I model is very ADHD friendly. A lot of people with ADHD don't have the patience for long courses or books, so they throw themselves straight into things. And that involves learning to be comfortable with ambiguity, with uncertainty, and just saying, okay, I've got this. I've done this many times before. Surrounding yourself with the right people and just believing and acting as if. And it is important because then people respond to you differently.
Yeah.
I also realized on that note, I think there are a lot of neurodivergent people in NLP. I think there are a lot of key figures in NLP that are some autistic and some ADHD and some a bit of both. I'm not going to name names, but I think if you have to think about it, you'll realize. People are gloriously neurodivergent, which is my term for it. The only problem with ADHD and autism is trying to function in a non-ADHD and autistic world.
Yes. And I think for me, I mean, I worked in mental health social work for a long time. And one of the pieces of work I used to do was working with people in A&E on their response to individuals who would go into A&E. Because how you respond will create and determine often the outcome for that individual, even if you're not intending to respond in a negative way. Sometimes it's very simple body language or words that's used, or just they can pick up signs that a million miles away that often we wouldn't necessarily pick up. So it's just quite interesting, that is as if. I think that's really powerful.
I have so many clients who work in the NHS, paramedics especially. Paramedics, first responders tend to be very ADHD. There are a lot of doctors, especially emergency doctors, ADHD, a lot of autistic doctors. Excuse me. And one of them recently told me something that I thought was amazing. I have a caseload of about 85 to 90 clients at any given time that I see over about a 3-week period. And most of them are really clever people, so I learn so much from them. I think of coaching a little bit like the idea, Darren Brown once did this, of playing 12 chess grandmasters in the same room, where you start one game off and then you play that grandmaster's moves against the next one, so you all play black, white. Coaching's a bit like that with neurodivergent, highly functioning neurodivergent people, because I learn things from them, I test things with them, and then I use that with other people. So this doctor, who's currently going through the process of becoming a consultant, works in an acute setting in psychiatry where people can suddenly cut themselves and bleed out, things like that. So her line manager had made sure they all installed Tetris on their phones. Anybody heard of this before? So the game Tetris, where you organize blocks.
Yeah, I've seen that, where you're building the building blocks.
And whenever they had a critical incident, he would instruct them to all go off to break rooms and play Tetris for a bit. And there are papers about this. It seems that visuospatial processing, to the degree required to play something like Tetris, Candy Crush kind of works, but Tetris especially, disrupts the process of forming traumatic memories.
Oh, that's fascinating.
It kind of suggests a link with that with EMDR. Yeah. And what's come out recently, especially since Francine Shapiro's death, and what John's talked about a lot more, is Francine Shapiro was John's secretary. And there's a lot of stuff written about this, that EMDR came from John originally.
Yeah.
And
very interesting.
NLP Global Leadership Summit, somebody shared some documents about this recently with a photograph that tended to pretty much confirm it.
Wow.
I don't know. It's been recorded, I'm being careful, but make your own minds up, go and look for it. But yes, so I'm going to tell you one more thing. I mentioned my passion is neuroscience at the moment. So this top-down hallucination thing, we get 5 updates per second. They've got it that precise. When we process something, we blink our eyes, which is kind of a cutoff point, and then process the next thing. And I learned this years ago from a guy called Walter Murch, who went to film school with people like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg in the 70s. Murch won his first Oscar for editing the sound on Apocalypse Now. And I used to go to a documentary festival in Sheffield, and Walter came and did some masterclasses there for a couple of years, about 15 years ago. One of the most fascinating people I've ever met, besides, say, John Grinder. Walter is a natural modeler. Walter realized, he wrote a book called In the Blink of an Eye, that whenever he made a cut, because he did film editing as well, he noticed the main character blinked just before he made his cut. So he found the most natural point intuitively to make a cut in a film edit was after somebody blinked. And he wrote this up, and some Japanese neuroscientists about 20 years ago went off and researched it and found it is actually a thing. The blinks we make, the involuntary blinks, are to do with processing, mostly. Of course, you have to calibrate them. But, so 5 times a second, they've got it that precise, we get an update. And we can only update maximum 1% of what's out there because of the bandwidth of working memory. 7 plus or minus 2, it's probably lower than that. It certainly is in ADHD and dyslexia. So that's how we update. So we're going to have problems with that. Most of it's still controlled hallucination. So most of how we interact with people is controlled hallucination. I have been married long enough and also been around enough people with relationship difficulties to realize, it's just my personal view, I'm not religious in any way. I'm interested in religion, but I happen to believe that marriages are worth working at. And I think marriage is a good thing. I think making a legal contract with a partner and having a child with a partner in that kind of relationship gets you to stick around and ride the waves. And I've come to the conclusion that most people who break up a long-term relationship do it prematurely. And they've got to the point where where each of them is the enemy. And everything the other person does is categorized, linguistically labeled, and framed as they're trying to get me, they're trying to get at me. And they get to the point where they fall out with each other, they fall out of love, and they get to the point where they just become indifferent to one another, and that's the point of no return. But I think the number one intervention for relationships like that should be start positively hallucinating about your partner. Just force yourself to think as if that this is the wonderful person I met all those years ago. They have my best interest at heart, they love me, and everything they do is acting from the best possible place at the time. And if you work on that basis, and I've done this in my own marriage, it transforms it. We had a conversation this morning in the Trainers Cafe about how the only person you can really change is yourself, but you can change an entire system by changing yourself. And you can work with one person in a relationship or a family to transform it on that basis. That was a long answer, but I hope there was something of interest there for you and for other people too. Neuroscience is fab. Go and read some neuroscience, ask AI to prove some things for you. Anybody get anything else? We've got time. I'm going to leave very abruptly in 18 minutes, but before then, go for it, Karen.
Sorry, I forgot to use the raise hand thing, the electronic
It's okay,
version.
I saw you had a hand and it went up, and that's fine.
Yeah. So I find my acting as if, I find that I can context specific. I find it much easier to use in some contexts than others. So for personal stuff, acting as if I feel more confident or acting as if I've already done that, whatever it is, I find quite easy. In a business context, I've viewed that there's two sorts of people when it comes to, maybe marketing a product or something like that, that it seems to fall into two categories. There's those that act as if they've created the product already and they market it, having not actually done anything at all. They do what you're suggesting. They just leap in and presumably see if there's enough
People
interest.
Who get you to subscribe to a magazine do that. They
Yeah.
get you to pay a subscription on the promise there's going to be 12 issues of the magazine that haven't even been written yet. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's true, actually. That's very true. Because I was thinking, with new products and stuff like that, it's they act as if they promote the product, they promote the service or whatever it is, and they haven't done anything about it whatsoever. They've got no framework, no nothing. And then there's those that tend to be more like me that I wouldn't dream of promoting something that I haven't even thought about.
The first one is way more effective.
Yes. Well, I think it is. Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. Everybody does it. Loads of people do it. It's like an experimental approach to marketing and business. Rather than wasting loads of time inventing something nobody wants, you just keep going, you drop it. When I was doing photography workshops, if a few days went by and nobody had registered for a workshop, I would just mark it as sold out and move on. Because clearly it was no good. And I might eventually get one person sign up and I have to go into the middle of nowhere at 1 o'clock in the morning in the rain, which happened more often than you might think for one person. And I've got a family and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that anyway. I mean, lockdown taught me I like going to bed the same time as my family and going to sleep. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And so think about this. Sometimes the easiest coaching and therapy clients are the people who can do something well in one context, but fail miserably in another.
Mm.
Because all you have to get them to do is drop the wall in between the two contexts and map it across.
Yeah, map it across.
I think most of what I learned in life, I learned from the original Karate Kid trilogy. Wax on, wax off, paint the fence, things like that. And I remember John some years ago saying he was interested in what it is that makes some people good at generalization, at generative learning, and some people not so good. And I found recently there is a whole thing in cognitive psychology and neuroscience about this called near transfer and far transfer. So near transfer is when you learn to do something similar to what you've already learned and you can do it. So you, for instance, hire a van because you're moving house. Never hire a van when you're moving house, get removal people, but a lot of you have probably discovered that's a good one anyway. But anyway, you do that. You've never driven a van before. You don't have to do a van driving test. You just get in the van and you work out it's bigger. So like my model of what my body is, my extended consciousness is bigger than it normally is when I'm on the road. I have to take a bit of a wide turn when I'm at junctions so I can see things and stuff like that. That's near transfer. Far transfer is when you learn to do something that you've never done before that's really different. So a lot of research, a couple of years ago for a client, I went and looked at the research on brain games, brain training, because she wanted to improve her work and memory. There are lots of claims from the manufacturers of said games, one of which costs a fortune, is only available in clinical settings. I think a couple are like that. And they say, oh yeah, that trains your work and memory, but the research says no. The research says that all brain training, brain games make you better at is brain games. And there is also a lot of research that says all learning to play chess will do for you, will make you better at playing chess. The assumption you'll automatically get more intelligent by playing chess, or that people who are intelligent will be good at chess, according to the research, is incorrect. But what I think it is that the majority of people, and psychology verifies this, aren't very good at far transfer. It's a rare skill. If somebody learned chess and they were good at far transfer, I think pretty much everybody in this room today will be good at far transfer or getting better at it, because NLP, it's the whole territory, far transfer. Noticing patterning and mapping that patterning across to a new context. But that's what I think is going on with that research, that most people aren't very good at it. But it's a hell of a skill. My AI bots certainly tell me it's a very valuable skill as well. Somebody who could teach far transfer in, say, a business setting. Working on that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
But you can
Thank
better
you.
test it. Part of the problem is, again, what we were discussing this morning, how you define it. Okay, I want to sell far transfer to businesses. That's not going to work. I need to find a problem they already have, that they are grinding their teeth over, that they can't do, that they're tearing their hair out, and I need to solve it with teaching them far transfer better. And I need them to excitedly say, yes, give me it now. And then I'll develop it. Otherwise, I won't. We've got a good 10 minutes. Who's next? Thanks, Karen. Oh, I don't have to nominate someone, do I?
Gary, would it be okay if I asked a generic question about modeling rather than specifically what you were talking about? Is that okay? Yeah. So I have a situation where I've got a family that I'm dealing with. 3 children in the family. 2 of them are older, 1 is younger. They're all the same gender. And the parents are having difficulty getting the younger child to model good behavior because the older ones are more set in their ways, and that's who he copies. So what would be a good approach to this, and how might I help them?
My answer would be different as a parent. That would be kind of get used to it, leave them alone, and hope for the best, and put them in good context where they're going to learn things. Because I've found that behaviorism with children doesn't work too well. I wouldn't say punishment, but rewards and sanctions. There's only so many times you can take the Xbox away. Things like that. So how do you get them to model it? You have to get them to want to model it in the first place. That's the thing. And that's a difficult one, because there's so much research in psychology over the years when people used to say watching violent films makes people more violent. It doesn't. It gives violent people ideas. copycat serial killers, for example, they don't become serial killers by reading about serial killers. They just learn how to do stuff. It's a difficult one. It's certainly one of those cases of being able to lead a horse to water, but not being able to make it drink. So it involves insiders, I think. I think modeling potentially is not the answer, apart from the parents should model the behaviors they want. There's a big part of working with neurodivergent people is emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitivity dysphoria, the dynamics in families and couples. Where how do you teach a child to be more emotionally regulated? You emotionally regulate yourself as much as possible, especially when you're around them. And children who are challenging like that will tend to provoke you more. In fact, they work out how to push your buttons, and they do it on a regular basis. So I would say you need an insider on that. It's an insider job. And however the family's structured, the parents, the older children, if they're up for it, need to model good behavior and change the system from within. Because no amount of trying to persuade them to become influenced by other people, I don't think that's going to work. And suddenly you think you know people, and then you get married and have a family, and all bets are off. And John has always said that you should not coach, for instance, your partner. It's unethical to coach your partner. So, if any of you have got into the position where you think, okay, my partner knows very little about NLP, and my partner, my wife's exact words, what she called it, a load of old bollocks. So it's nice to have somebody like that to keep you healthily in perspective, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you shouldn't be coaching your partner. I've always thought, okay, I could help my wife with a few things if I could only coach her and if she'd only be coached. Then I came to the conclusion I shouldn't be doing that. And John says that. A lot of people say that. I remember him saying once he did some therapy with his mother. And what he had to do was go and buy a hat, and I think a jacket he'd never worn before that he would only wear when he was going to coach his mother. And said, when you see me in that hat and jacket, I'm not John, I'm your therapist. And that kind of works. But yeah, it's a difficult one, especially inside the family system. Is there something in there that helps, though?
Yeah, that does help, because one realization I've had from what you've been saying is, I think what's happening is that the parents are actually leaving the modeling to the older children, and the older children are trying to be parents when they're not.
Right. No.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. Well, this is what good family therapists do. They look at the dynamics, and they work out where the leverage points are, the ways to make a change and have somebody behave differently.
Yeah. Fascinating. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. Anyone else? I'm just going to go on the gallery view in case I've missed anyone. Oh, we have a few people, for whatever reason, have needed to have cameras off, and that's fine. I do that often enough. Okay, so I could see all the people that I can see. You got anything, Dora or Carol? It's okay if you haven't. I'm just checking in. Dora, you got something?
Yeah, I'm here. So I'm pretty newbie in the NLP field because I'm just doing an NLP-based transformational coaching back to Hungary online. And I'm far from this area, but very, very interested deep in my heart, as I think I just believed in NLP world before. And for me, it's just very, very basic NLP, what I got. So what are your and the others' suggestions? How to strengthen my abilities in the NLP field? Because this is the way I would like to help my clients, just to be visualization, meta modeling, and etc. How can I help them with questioning? Good questioning, belief in themselves, and not as a consultant, not as a mentor, So I'm not the lead who knows what are the problems of how the solution of them, but they are. So.
Got it. So before you ever heard about NLP,
NLP
existed. Oh.
Yeah, it's okay.
Before John Grinder ever met Richard Bandler and Frank Puselic, NLP existed in the world. It just wasn't called that. It wasn't grouped together as that. So these patterns have always been there in people. So it's becoming more aware of patterns in people. But in terms of coaching, the best advice I can give you is that if you don't already, go and learn something about Milton Erickson. Go and read Erickson's book, watch his videos. Erickson was very strategic. Every approach that he used was different for every client and was based on the patterns he observed in that client. A lot of the Ericksonians kicked off when John and Richard modeled Milton and started writing and teaching about it, that essentially had commercialized Ericksonian therapy, and some might say ripped it off. I wouldn't go that far at all. I think it puts noses out of joint when somebody takes something that works and puts it out in the world. Erickson started to turn against them as well himself, by all accounts. But Erickson's a good one to study. So a lot of what we do in NLP, the stuff that really works, comes from Erickson, I think. And there was a time when I would say Gregory Bateson, and it does. But Bateson knew Erickson long before Bandler knew Grinder. For those of you that don't know, Bateson and Erickson knew each other since about 1940, something like that, when Bateson went to seek Erickson after doing some research with Balinese trance dancers to help them recognize who was in trance and who wasn't. So those two people, very, very critical to NLP and play a bigger part than most of the other figures that we talk about. So go study Erickson. Go and read one of his books. Read My Voice Will Go With You by Sidney Rosen. My Voice Will Go With You is a set of really short paragraphs of Erickson case studies. And by reading all of those, will give you a top-level overview of the way Erickson tended to think. And then go and study some stuff like that's been written about Erickson, preferably in the NLP community, because I think even though it was far from a perfect model, it's probably the best model at the time that we had of Erickson. Another one is Ronald Havens, Havens, wrote a couple of books, The Wisdom of Milton Erickson, that are very similar to My Voice Will Go With You. And there's also Uncommon Therapy by Jay Haley, which is about Erickson. None of those people are NLP people. They're all Erickson people. But it's interesting. And then just go and read some of Erickson's stuff as well. He's got some fabulous books and fabulous cases. I love The February Man. The February Man is all about how to work with clients who've experienced trauma to have them build a new identity that communicates with them and educates them. So all of this stuff's free NLP. And The February Man has the NLP phobia cure almost verbatim in it.
Wow, really?
And although it was written after
Mm-hmm.
Erickson's death, the case was from the 1950s, I think. So the phobia technique is there step by step as a way to deal with trauma. And it may well be it's just a pattern that John and Richard uncovered, but it was also in Erickson's work. There's nothing new under the sun. Does that help?
Yeah, very much.
Calibrate, observe, calibrate, take action, iterate, have the world teach you, provoke the world. Find situations where you can force yourself to learn things quickly. I'm not suggesting that you bruise your legs, but no big deal. Got better a week later. We're nearly up to time, but thank you. Are you okay, Carol? You don't have to say anything, but you all right?
Yes, no, I will. Very quickly, fascinating. Thank you. I just love this as if scenario, and I don't know. I'm a tennis player. I still play local league. I've got a match tonight actually, but I played quite high level in my younger years.
You've read the inner game of tennis, then, Timothy Garland.
Yeah, a long time ago.
That's
very
NLP friendly. But anyway, yeah.
So I've been watching, I don't know if anyone else has, but the Roland Garros and some of the fantastic matches. It's all open now. But an example, and I was just double checking this for me of an as if is, I don't know if anyone saw when Fonseca played against Djokovic, and he won in 5 sets, and his last 3 points, he was actually game point down. He'd served a few aces during the match, but he actually served 3 clean aces, one after another. One to bring it back to game, one to go to advantage, and one to win the match. And when he was interviewed afterwards, he was asked by the interviewer, I think it's usually Mats Wilander, it probably was him, and he said, what were you thinking at that point? And he said, I actually imagined that I was John Isner, who, for anyone who knows anything about tennis, John Isner was 6'11", American, and known for he could serve a whole game of aces.
Right.
And so it was almost impossible to break his serve. So potentially most games ended. I think he was in the longest ever tiebreak match, or match where there was the most number of games. It was like, I can't remember, 32 games or something in the final set. It went on for 3 days. So it was like he just literally said, and I hope this is a correct example, but literally, as if I am John Isner, I am going to serve now, and embodied the whole thing of what he'd watched, and just literally put 3 clean aces down. So that was
it's the difference between saying I'm going to be like John Isner. I'm going to put in I am John Isner.
Yeah,
I am going to let him possess me.
Yes, and I just think that is the real, for me, embodiment of modelling,
totally,
of excellence.
That's how you do it. But you also, if you read John's work, you have to put precautions in place. So once you've established communication with your unconscious with yes/no signals, which can be finger signals, body sways, anything you like, you ask it, if anything happens which would call into question my well-being, will you filter it out or stop the process? Because Steve Gilligan did deep trance identification with Erickson, and as best as I can ascertain, developed issues with mobility afterwards, and also developed diabetes, both of which Erickson had. Erickson had two forms of 3 non-forms of polio. I've verified this from different sources and read it even in Ericksonian sources, so I think that's all correct. Don't quote me on it, but I think so. And then John and Richard had to clean things up a bit so he could walk properly again after going around in a wheelchair modeling them. So you've got to be careful. It's pretty powerful stuff. I've missed all the French Open, but as a family, we will be watching Wimbledon, and especially Alcaraz. We really enjoyed watching Alcaraz last year.
Yeah, hopefully he'll be back with, because he's been injured.
I know. He'll be back. Surely he will.
Well, I hope so. Yeah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, everyone. I tend to organise most of my days as coaching appointments on the hour with like whatever break the client gives me when we finish. So I've got somebody at 2 o'clock, so I'm off. It's been a pleasure. Remember the email address. If you haven't emailed already and you want to be part of a follow-up, let's do it. We'll do a follow-up study/group thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. But I know you're very short on time, so we'll give you a maximum break. Thank you very much. And we'll get the recording up as soon as we can. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Take care.